Hi, my name's Andy. Welcome to Really Random Reads. Today I'm going to share a few thoughts with you about this book, Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. It's going to be spoiler free, and then at the end I'm going to have a little section where I do talk about things that would probably spoil the novel for you if you haven't read it, so leave at that point. I kind of know, or I sense, that I've hit upon a really good book in a couple of ways. One of those ways is I begin to debate the character motivations as if the characters in the novel, I'm just talking about novels fiction here, as if the characters in the novel were actually real people. I had that throughout this book. Another way, in recent times, because I haven't had this channel very long, is I begin to be filled with dread at the idea of doing a video because I think there's so much that I like about this book and want to share. How on earth am I going to cram it all in? How am I going to do the book justice? And you can't, of course. So what I'm going to do instead is, and again, spoiler free, I'm going to give you a sense of what it's about and a sense of what I enjoyed in it, in the hope that if you haven't already, you'll read it. And if you have read it, there's a bit at the end so we can chat about it. It's a book about a intense relationship between a small group of friends. We meet them when they appear to be at a kind of boarding school, and then it follows them through life into early adulthood. I say it's a book about that, though of course there's a lot of other things going on and there's a lot of other ways of looking at it. Martin Scorsese, we're going to come back to this book in a second, promise. Martin Scorsese, famous film director, said of the horror movie Hereditary that what he will remember of it is not the horror element, not the demonic stuff and all the rest of it. It was the intense relationship between the family and all the conflict going on between the family. That, in a sense, in spirit, is what I am going to remember and have remembered from this book. It's a dystopian novel. We'll talk about that a bit more soon. But it's their friendship group that I remember more than anything else from this that I take away. It's the intense power and rivalries and messed up dynamics within that group that most resonate with me. That group has a kind of like mini dictator in it, which when I think back to friendship groups and even adult friendship groups, so I was going to say friendship groups when I was younger, but even adult friendship groups, that can be particularly a thing that's there or a person who is presenting in that way. But I do think that is most intense in kind of like the adolescent period of life, or that period of life most invites that. It explores this thing really well that I had kind of forgotten from being younger, of being in a group of very intense friends where one person is lying, but lying almost does it injustice. I prefer this word fabulism. So, coming from the word like fables, something it's a lie that's made up, yeah, not true, but there's a willingness on the part of the people hearing it to kind of buy into it and believe it. And probably also on the person who is doing the telling, the person who is giving that lie. If any of that resonates with you, then this book is masterful for exploring it. Okay, genre. So dystopian fiction, and for that reason it put me off, I think, if I'm honest, because as with any genre, I tend not to connect with it if it leans into the genre too heavily. For example, if this was dystopian fiction, I'm going to say now with like a splash of sci-fi, where flying saucers had come down and the world was ending, some sort of perhaps War of the Worlds type story, it can be a brilliant book, but it just doesn't kind of click with me. The type of dystopian fiction I really like is when it's done like this, where 90% of the things that are going on in the story are ordinary and everyday, but you have this weird, uncanny, skewed 10%. Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood would be another example. So much of that book is ordinary, everyday, mundane, that when you get the dystopian alternative reality part of it, you kind of just swallow it down. Or I did at any rate, and that was true here. Norfolk is a place in England that is very nice. Calm, green, Morris dancing comes from there, if you know what Morris dancing is. But it is not somewhere that I would immediately associate with figuring very, very prominently about a novel about dystopian themes and nearing sort of the world being in a mess. It's Norfolk, okay? Like, I wouldn't have put it there. It's things like that that Ishiguro does, where he plays the quiet notes. I would say that sounds very pretentious, but there you go. That make the book really, in a strange way, an inverse way, give it power, turn on its head and give it punch. Gore, and I'm careful of saying that word, I don't want to put anyone off reading this, but gore also as well, how visceral this writing is. And it's so strange because when you finish and step away from it, he hasn't really shown you anything gory. All he has done is imply things. And yet there were points in this book, even though he hadn't shown me anything, and I read some really bloody horror fiction quite often, very visceral, like over the top stuff. Even though he hadn't really shown me anything and it was very subtle, I found this book much more deeply uncomfortable than those visceral works. And if you're not a fan of gore and things like that, please don't be put off by this book. I don't want to unintentionally scare you away. And I just want to say something about adolescent dialogue before we leave you. Adolescent dialogue can be the downfall of writers trying to write young characters. If I was writing something now, trying to sound like somebody who was a teenager, using specific dialogue, that would be incredibly challenging to do. In my case, probably disastrous. I'd be trying to get words in there like vibes and all sorts of things that are just going to date very, very quickly and seem cringeworthy. Ishiguro pulls off a masterstroke of having convinced me, to the point that I wasn't even questioning it, that these were adolescent characters. Not only that, but in several cases, teenage girls. But by doing it in a way with the language that it doesn't feel cringy. So there's a line in this, it won't spoil anything for you, but he says, but the dialogue reads, "You're the successor." That's it. But when I read that line, I completely bought that came from the mouth of a teenager, and in the context that it came out and all the kind of weird dynamics and things that were going on, the power plays involved, he nailed it. We've arrived in spoiler territory, folks, and I'm talking to people who've read this book. So, what I was saying about language and the subtlety of the language in this, but also what I was saying about gore and how he has created something that, at least for me, was extremely unsettling, but through implication, by not showing me loads and loads. Here's a line for you. Ruth's first donation went badly. I stopped reading the book at that point. I had to have a break from it. Why was that? Well, we're talking about a compulsory organ donation, one that Ruth didn't have a choice in. In the modern world, organ donation is a very important and positive thing. I have an organ donation card myself. But that word donation might make us think it's amelioration, right? It might make us think of popping some money in a charity tin. It doesn't make us perhaps think of having an organ cut out. And in the context of this book, this world, having an organ cut out, really, without your consent, you don't want it to happen. Ruth's first donation went badly. That word, badly. Ishiguro could have painted loads. He could have spent 500 words trying to do some sort of splatterpunk horror description of an organ removal going badly. Instead, he just uses that one word, badly. That was enough to make me close this book and have a break. It resonated with people I've known in hospital. It resonated with all sorts of horrible things I'm not going to go into and inflict upon you here. So really skillful writing. And that is something that I take away from him as an author. This element of underplay, subtlety, doing less with more. My favourite kind of minimalism. I would say I don't kind of click with minimalist writing, mainly because I think of that as something that writers like Chuck Palahniuk do. Now, I actually have read a lot of his books and really like one of his books called Consider This, which is about the craft of writing. But his style of minimalism, which was really sort of taught to him by the writer Tom Spanbauer, I feel bad saying this, but it just kind of leaves me cold. And my imagination actually doesn't rush to fill in all the empty space that he leaves in his writing. It just kind of doesn't work for me. But I love what I would call minimalism in Ishiguro's case, done like this. A novel about loss. So I can't remember where I heard it, but several years ago I had something that really resonated for me, which was that good stories about love and romance, they're really about loss. Loss is, and by good I think I mean powerful. Loss is kind of at the heart of them. Now that's there throughout this, and it's there in his other novel, Remains of the Day, which I haven't read, but I feel like I have. Heresy to say I'm butchered by now, because I've seen the film, and my understanding is the film is very close to the book. I'd still like to read the book, especially more so after having read this. But Remains of the Day stands out in my mind as being about loss, particularly missed opportunity and the chance to have had a relationship that you didn't take up. Here we go. That's in this book once again. Between the protagonist and the character Tommy, there's a lot of forces around them in which you could say, well, they were doomed anyway. But from early on in their life, they did have a choice whereby, it's quite a brutal interpretation, I suppose, but they chose to miss out on having spent a number of years together. And the other character in the friendship group, who has been in a relationship with Tommy throughout that period, she talks at a point in this story, and you can have debates about her character motivations and whether she'll tell the truth or not, but she talks about having deprived the main character of that, and I would say she's saying that she did that intentionally. So loss. Subtlety at the end, brilliant, tiny little things in this book meaning so much. For example, one of the really key moments at the climax of the novel at the end is Tommy just ignores Ruth. And if you are reading, I always talk about this book, Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting book that I have, let's just say, very mixed feelings about. It would talk about, or it would big up, things having to be done, pivotal plot points having to come through action, and it really encourages big action. Here's something very subtle. Tommy ignores Ruth. It's actually an omission, but it means so much and gives this book, or contributes to this book's, super powerful ending. The friendship group is the toxic dynamics, or difficult dynamics, or complex, let's say, dynamics in the group of friends is the part that I will remember. But I don't think one of the key themes should be overlooked, which for me was, what's the point of art? What's the point of creating stuff if essentially we're all just born to die? Now, I'm not going to talk extensively about that, because the Chekhov quote, "Show me the problem well." Mr. Ishiguro shows you the problem well. So if you would like to grapple with that problem, have a read or a reread of this book. He does it really well there. On the subtlety point, let's have a talk about story structure. So you are 70 pages into this book before you get the first kind of explicit mention that there's something going on here with organs, and it happens almost in passing. It happens enough, it sticks out enough that it's really clear Ishiguro wants us to pick up on it, but also it's subtle, it's in passing, it's a very sort of deftly done. Halfway through, you get an explicit mention of clones, but it's back to swallowing this whole thing down, because he's given me so much of the everyday and so many things that resonate, like complex friendship groups, that when you get that clone mention at the halfway point, by which you're already all in, you're committed. If you've stuck with it to that point, I reckon you're going to finish it. I don't think many people have gone halfway through this book and then saw that word and put it down. He's got you. So it's kind of what am I trying to say? It's masterful, in my view, the way that he reveals these dystopian, not real elements of the book, but does it in a way that you still swallow it down. Final thing, because I do want to try and give a bit of balance with this. I'm trying to think of something that for me didn't work. And this isn't a review, it's just me sharing thoughts, but something that didn't work for me was the character of Miss Emily towards the end. Now, I reckon, I haven't looked this up, but I reckon either consciously, and I suspect it was consciously or subconsciously, there was channeling going on here of Miss Havisham from Great Expectations, Charles Dickens' book. And maybe also Rose for Emily by William Faulkner, which is a Gothic, Southern Gothic short story. This is Pickle beating the door down to come in the lounge. She might join us in a minute. So. I like both of those stories. Here she comes. Hello. Welcome. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, Miss Havisham, A Rose for Emily, the Southern Gothic story. You get towards the end this scene where there's a character, in my view, not coincidentally, also called Miss Emily, and there is a lot of plot exposition there. It's a lot of, if you're going to be ungenerous, you could say it's a lot of a character just dumping the reveal, kind of dumping the information about this world, what's been going on. Books like that screenwriting book and other books on craft that I've mentioned, they will often sort of set out as a principle that you shouldn't show story through dialogue. You should show it through showing it and through action. And I don't want to say that this novel should be any different. And if it is a kind of homage to Great Expectations and A Rose for Emily, then I kind of like that as well. But it did just kind of stick out a bit for me. So what am I saying? I don't think I actually am saying I didn't like it. I'm saying I'm undecided. And here's what I'm saying. I'm curious to know what you think. If you've read it, what did you make of that? Maybe put spoiler if you discuss it in the comments before you sort of write about it, because there'll be others who haven't read this book if anybody watches this. So thank you very much for watching this video. It's definitely a recommend. If you haven't read it, I suspect I am very late to the game, folks. And that was almost a bit like, do I want to make a video on this? Because is it money for old rope? You've got so many alternative videos you could just watch on this. Why would you want to watch mine? I don't mean this book is old rope. This book is great. But when you leave, there's another. We started with an indication of when I think a book is good. Let's finish with one. When you want to talk about it, when you want to share your views on it. So there's my thoughts on it. Thanks very much.